Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is the Curriculum Committee meeting, Thursday, December 8th, 2022. We will start out with an election of a committee chairperson. Do I have a nomination?
I have one.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
I'd like to nominate Sarah Parent for chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Second,
I'll second that.
Mrs. Best. All those in favor?
Aye.
3. Good. Thank you. Congratulations, Sarah, and thank you again for chairing the. Yeah.
Dude, you took my papers. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. As Duke said, this is a special meeting of the Curriculum Committee. Our next meeting was scheduled for January 12th. Unfortunately, we have a conflict. So we are working to reschedule that. We are planning to make it at some point the week of January 9th. So we will update you on that. We have 3 items on our agenda this morning to discuss. The first is a selection and challenging of instructional materials, and I will turn it over to Dr. Schramberg.
Good morning, everyone. We are going to focus on 3 areas this morning for this part of the presentation, starting with the overview of the development and process, what we currently do for challenging materials, and a few thoughts on moving forward. So the district curriculum drivers, meaning what is behind how the curriculum is created, are 3 main gears. The first is standards and frameworks. We have curriculum standards and frameworks for every content area and grade level across all disciplines. The other 2 pieces are the competencies of the vision of the graduate, and that ties in with our high school accreditation and the district strategic plan. And those are all move in congruence with our mission and our vision. The cycle itself is a responsive curriculum process. The process is relatively unique to Darien because we respond in real time to needs that exist within the curriculum. The other, if it's not a responsive curriculum, it really is a cycle where every 4 years a team might revisit the English curriculum and edit on a predetermined cycle. So we do have a curriculum revision plan for every content area and grade level across all disciplines. That plan is articulated in the budget every year, where we say these are the focus areas for next year, and we request hours to do that work through RC19. After we know the hours that we have, we establish curriculum teams. Curriculum teams are made up of our teachers in the district. So our teachers write our curriculum. Once that curriculum is written, they work with the administrator in that department area for the curriculum to be approved and implemented. When there are questions, it might move to the larger curriculum team to review. Then the curriculum is, after that curriculum is reviewed with the administrators, the changes are communicated to the teachers that have to deliver the curriculum, as well as the building administrators who provide the oversight of that. And so that is our cycle in a nutshell. We've talked quite a bit about instructional resources in the past. So just to calibrate, there are instructional resources that are primary and secondary. So primary instructional resources are those that are guaranteed that whoever is teaching a grade level or a course, students would encounter those same materials. And then those are others that are teacher selected, which could be mentor texts, often things that are read aloud, things that are current events because something's happening in the news, and we want to make sure we're responding in real time to the needs of students. There are 2 policies that I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention. The first one is the actual selection of instructional materials. This is language from our actual policy. This is 6610. And this talks about the board's responsibility and how the material is these responsibilities are shared and delegated to the district curriculum leadership team. And the other are the 5 areas of curricular exemption. According to the state of Connecticut, these are the 5 areas where parents can opt out of their children experiencing these instructional components. And those are listed here: dissection, family life education, HIV/AIDS, sexual abuse and assault, and prevention and firearm safety. So those are the 5 areas.
And Chris, before you move on,
Yeah.
can you just iterate who is on that district curriculum leadership team?
Yeah, so the curriculum leadership team is made up of 11 people. It's myself, department chairs for special education at the middle school and high school, department chairs for math, English, science, social studies, world language, director of music and director of elementary education, and director of instructional technology. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here. So when we are in a situation where someone is challenging materials that might exist within the curriculum, we try to resolve those by following the district chain of communication. If we are not able to reach a resolution and there's a high volume of concerns, then the materials are reviewed by the district leadership team. The district leadership team also consults appropriate people. So it's not just these 11 people in isolation. If there is an issue with a middle school science curriculum, we'll work with middle school science teachers, middle school administration, to make sure we have a more comprehensive understanding of what the challenge is, and we want to make sure we're addressing the concerns appropriately. And then after the team meets and goes through our process, then then they share the results with the people that expressed interest in the topic. The 4 guiding questions that the team has used are listed here. Does the text connect to or support the curriculum? Is the text developmentally appropriate? Are there other resources that represent a similar perspective? And does the text align to or support district goals and guiding documents? So those are the overarching questions. With consideration of moving forward, that process is relatively new. We haven't had to use it in the past, so it's recently developed. There is no policy that governs what that process is. So we can continue doing things like we've done them the past month or 2 months. We can create a policy for challenging materials in the instructional program. That is the will of the board. And then that would be moving the board to a full discussion to decide what does or does not need to go to policy.
Thank you. Quick question about the couple of slides previously. If you refer to a high volume of unresolved curriculum matters, what's that threshold? What does that mean to you?
Again, this was created, this is the first time that we've navigated this. So the high volume that we determined, it was over 10 that were just not coming to a resolution. So once it hit 10, that was our number of, we need to take further action.
Thank you. I will open it up to questions, but I want to say, I believe that there's an appetite to create, at least I have a personal appetite to create a policy around this so that it's formal, it's structured. The community knows what we expect and what of the community, and also what they can expect from us. So I am supportive of your moving forward ideas, but I will also open up to thoughts and comments too for other members. Julie, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Tara, you have I can't see your hand. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry it was late. So I have a couple questions. One is, and I know you just talked about possibly changing this idea of the review committee. So maybe that's for a later date, but at the moment, if someone challenges and then the review committee looks at it, is that review committee the same as the committee that originally chose the curriculum, or is it a different set of individuals?
It's a different set of individuals in that the people that created the curriculum are not necessarily on the committee. There's an administrator representation that represents that grade level or department area within that committee. When there's a question during the development process, they might consult other members of the team to weigh in. But when this group of 11 people come together, there was not a moment in time where everyone looked at that unit of study and said, yes, this is the curriculum. So there are people that are seeing materials for the first time in that process.
Okay. And then I have a question about the policy 6330, where it talks about exemptions in family life education. Is there a definition of what that family life education entails?
There is I believe there's a very brief definition that is in our policy. I can reference that and get that to you. But
Okay,
it's
I would
not,
be
it's not a
curious as to-
comprehensive definition.
Okay, I'd be curious to hear what that is. And that's all my questions at the moment. Thank you.
Julia, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you. A couple questions. For the opting out, Chris, that you
Wait,
meant.
can I stop you briefly? Sorry, I'm just going to answer Tara's question. I just pulled up the policy. The family life education instruction is defined as instruction pertaining to family planning, human sexuality, parenting, nutrition, and the emotional, physical, psychological, hygienic, economic, and social aspects of family life.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, sorry, Sarah, where did you see that? Just.
It's, I just pulled up 6330 in our policies.
Okay, cool. All right.
The curricular exemptions, can you talk a little bit about how an individual can opt out of something if it's woven into the curriculum, or does it need to be discrete and sort of stand alone? How does that work?
So most of the items are discrete. The family life and planning is the one where it's not often as discrete because we have a skills-based curriculum at the middle school and secondary health level. So if a parent is opting out, and the procedure for opting out is you provide notification prior to the instruction happening. But if students in our health program are creating individual and personalized goals that could be related to one of these topics, that at any point could come up in a discussion. Because if one person is working on something related to fitness or wellness, and one person is working on a project related to substance abuse, someone else could be on a topic related to family life and planning. And the way that our program works, it's in a cycle and it's ongoing. So it's not okay, the next 3 weeks of this course, we are going to be talking about family life and planning. So in those instances, especially at the middle school level, we have had to provide alternate options for students for an entire semester because that topic could come up at any time.
And then my other question, I appreciate that this is kind of unfolding in real time as we haven't had to do this in the past. So regarding the threshold for when and how we review an item, I have questions about how we decide when something has reached critical mass, so to speak. I'm not, and I'm sort of thinking aloud, I'm not certain that a number of communications from the public is the right answer, because I think we need to use our discretion in evaluating what the questions are. Are they unique questions? Are there multiple concerns? In this day and age, I think we have noticed that we do at times get a flood of the same message over and over again. But if that is the way we're going to look at it, then I would also question how we respond and to whom. I think you guys know that I would have liked a response on this latest incident to have been sent out more broadly, more quickly, because I think there was more being stirred up in the community that I think, can't know, I think we might have been able to address or solve for to some degree with an earlier answer. So as we talk about how we want to package this from the curriculum committee to, I think, probably hand off to the next group to work on it or to bring back to the full board, I'd like to have discussion in that area.
May I answer that, Chris? It's just,
Sure. Can I just respond to that? Are you responding to that?
I was going to respond to that.
Okay, you're the boss.
Well, I just, since the number 10 was put on the table out there, it's not exclusively a number. I would say that I would be in favor of clearly clarifying how a community member, staff member, or board member, or anyone actually will go through the process of expressing a concern and having it reviewed. You just mentioned that you're always in the better position of having that articulated up front as opposed to doing it in real time. So I think that the staff that did the best job they could in terms of with integrity going through that process. I think that there was one person who was on that committee who had any influence on the book, 1 out of 11 at that.
At the coming in stage, do you mean?
At the evaluation stage on the curriculum team. The threshold we have used, in this case, we had about half of the parents who communicated to us, and I say initially in the first couple of weeks were in favor and half were not. And then that was about 15 initially and about 15 on both sides. At that point, given that we didn't have a policy or procedure, I would actually recommend that the policy procedure would be, if anyone wants to actually question the materials or textbooks, or I don't think there is a number. In this case, we did decide that given the number of families we have, given the number of people that we were responding to, in that case was about 15, that we would go through the chain of command and we would respond to them one at a time. So that was the background. Whether it's right, wrong, or different, I think the 10 was also considered in consultation with what context, what was going on, right? And certainly we respect different opinions on the level of noise, the level of disturbance, the level of disruption. All of those things come into that. Whether that's the right judgment or not is a different discussion. But fundamentally, I would agree with the chair that we move forward with, given anybody who wants to challenge it. I don't want to bog the whole system down, but I don't think it will. I really don't think it will. And I think it should be anybody who wants to, individual or otherwise, who wants to challenge materials.
Yeah, and I think, do you want to, before I,
Right, Chris, I don't know.
No, I agree. So I agree that every person's voice in the community matters. And if a person wants to challenge a resource, they should have the opportunity to challenge that. There are 6 sample policies and or regulations in the packet, which will likely move along to the full board or to the policy committee. But you'll see that that's typical, that a person can challenge something that exists either as part of the curriculum or something that's on the shelves in the library. This was a matter of responding in real time, and I'll use the word unrest. So people were going through the chain of communication, and it felt like there was resolution wasn't happening, and that's why that was the determination at the time.
Dave, you haven't said and shared your piece yet, so I want to, before I ask more.
I appreciate that. I did have a few questions. I can go now or after you, Sarah, either way.
No, go ahead.
So I have a few questions. So you sure you don't want to just follow up on something, or I don't, either way?
No, go ahead.
All right. So I guess I have 3 questions coming in, Chris, to the presentation. The first is, you mentioned that we have sort of a dynamic on the fly curriculum review process versus, say, a quadrennial type review done by other districts. What's the reason for that? Why are we different than everyone else? And has anyone ever thought about what the cost differential is for our on-demand versus 4-year review cycle?
I'll answer the last question first. I don't think that there is a big difference in cost differential. We're responding in time to what needs to be changed. And I don't think that number would look different if we were taking a year and looking at all of the English curriculum at one time. So the reason it's different is there might be needs to change a curriculum or program in real time based on the adoption of a new textbook, based on new courses coming in, based on courses leaving the program. So instead of focusing all resources on one team and one department, we are really literally responding in real time. So the World Language Department, for example, they have a process of, after each unit is taught, they actually go into the unit and make notes on what needs to be updated for summer curriculum. The alternative to that would be, this is our curriculum and we really can't go back and update it for 3 more years, even though we might see a way to do things differently. So it sounds a little bit silly that more districts don't do it this way, but they don't. There's more of a cycle in many other places than the responsiveness that we have here.
And I guess to follow up on that, for those who are not in the trenches per se, if I do a post-implementation review for that Spanish class you just mentioned, hypothetically, what am I looking at? It's not that there's new words in Spanish, is it? Or what changed that I would want to roll forward?
It might be a unit is not successful in general. So if students don't reach a level of mastery that's desirable for the way the unit was developed, they might want to revisit the whole unit at one time. If it's a small tweak, obviously those things happen all of the time. We can make adjustments. And in reference to those secondary instructional materials, we might just say, okay, we need to just trade this out. And I think that'll be more successful.
Okay. The next question I would have, again, going to the presentation and a point Ms. Bess raised, I see the policy cited. I see very high level, but then you mentioned a process and we have a committee and we have people working together. How do we, tick and tie that? Because there's a big gap from a high level policy to what actually happens to delivery of curriculum. What are the written procedures there? How is that managed? What is the process that's followed, not only in a review, but from the initiation of implementation?
There really aren't articulated formal processes, starting
Wait,
at
wait. I'm sorry. Articulated? I'd asked about written. I'm sorry.
written. So
So you don't have written policies for this work.
there are no, we have our broad policy. There's not regulations that go with the instructional materials policy that we have.
We don't have procedures that staff follows. We don't have steps.
Yes, we do have procedures. We do have steps. We do have a timeline.
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't focus on the term being used for, the stack of papers, but I guess the question I would have is, what is that stack of papers? What is the process? How do you guys go through this? How is this actually, mapped out to be executed on?
So based on the 4-year cycle, in the spring, the members of the teachers bargaining unit receive an email asking who is interested in working on curriculum. From the people that express interest, teachers are selected who might have an expertise or specialty in that area. And they go through the process of writing and revision mostly over the summer. And
that process of revision, are there any guidelines or process or something that they follow, or are they just, because they're teachers, they know how to do this work?
no, last year we put into place a 2-part training that teachers participate in when they write. So they do one professional development session on the actual construction of understanding by design unit. So they clearly understand the 3 phases of developing a unit of study. And then the second one is more practical on the new platform we have, EduPlanet. So we can make sure we have all of those stage 1, the stage 1 components of the curriculum posted. So we're being clear and transparent for the community.
Okay. I think, and again, I apologize as a new board member on the curriculum committee here. I think that the high level presentation was great as a conversation starter. I think in order to be able to do this work and really know what to move forward with for a recommendation to policy in the entire board, we're going to need to see what this process is, whether it's procedures, whether it's a tool. We're going to have some idea how this works and how this is done, other than just a very high level PowerPoint. And I think that needs to include not just the review process, which is currently a hot topic, but also the entire process and how that work gets done. I think that was a founding goal of this curriculum committee, was to have visibility and access into what this process is, given the large number of people we have in terms of curriculum chairs, in terms of department heads, in terms of a process that's been fairly opaque, and given the very clear statutory obligations of the board to approve all curriculum. So I think it's fine that that work gets done and is delegated, but unless we actually know how that work is being done and what the procedures are, and if perhaps there are gaps and there aren't procedures and there aren't steps written out, then that's going to have to be the work of the board to actually put that in place for the district curriculum work. So would love to see what you guys are doing now, so we can start identifying gaps and see where we're going to have to build out the framework going forward. Is just kind of my thought. And then one last question I would have, Chris, is we received an email last night to the board, which is, I guess it appears to be responsive to a FOIA request. I don't know if it is or it isn't. If it is, there were a number of materials ordered in there, which looks like they were ordered from your office. Looks like, 20, 12 books, something in that. Be curious to know the educational or curriculum tie-in to each of those books that was ordered. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's, that FOIA request is a different question, I think. So I just want to go to your point about, if there's any procedure for writing curriculum and your thought about whether there's, stack of papers that tell teachers what to do. I'm going back to my own time writing curriculum when I was teaching, and I don't know that that's what we're taught in school. And that's like my master's degree is curriculum and teaching. Like, you learn how to write curriculum. I don't know that there's, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I don't know if teachers have this is how you write curricula in the Darien School District.
There wasn't anything. So I shouldn't say that. There wasn't a process that everyone goes through to approach curriculum the same way. They worked with their relative content areas to develop curriculum for those courses. In effort to standardize practice, last year, we created this two-part professional development session. So one was a general approach to creating high quality understanding by design units of study. And I led that session, and I'll continue to do that. The second one is working with one of our representatives from EduPlanet 21, who specifically goes into how do you bring that to life in the new platform. So it's not telling people what they need to write, because they still have their professional autonomy for the area that they're trained. But understanding by design, there are specific best practices and how you would approach writing a unit of study.
So just really quick, if I could follow up, because I'm going to have to jump in a second, I apologize, but I do appreciate, professional, sort of agency and ability to operate, as professionals as teachers certainly are. And I appreciate, Sarah, you having that experience. So thank you. That being said, I'm in a profession as well. I do have guardrails. I do have guidelines I have to follow. And there are certain things I would have to do to go through certain procedures as a professional. The two are not exclusive. Just because I'm in a profession doesn't mean there are not certain procedures I have to follow and policies I have to follow. So I can't think it's just completely freewheeling, and perhaps it is, and maybe it should be, or maybe the board actually needs to step in and put that in place if it doesn't exist. But I think this is going to have to be much more thorough than this very cursory slideshow, which I do think was just fine to start off the conversation. But going forward, I wouldn't feel comfortable without being able to do a deep dive. And if we don't have written supervisory procedures or written policies, that seems like it's going to be a first step. So thank you all for your time, and I'll check in later. Thank you.
I was just going to add also, if I could, perhaps if we're going back to the foundational levels here to make sure we bring in what the state requirements are as well. It's not like we're loosey-goosey deciding what we're going to teach here in Darien.
Tara, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you. I just have a question, just back to the policy, just because, as we know, a lot of what we heard from younger parents of younger students was specifically that one book and, things based around that and human sexuality and over sexualized materials and what have you. And I know some have asked to be opted out. I'm interested to know how we're defining human sexuality. So does some of these materials fall under that parents would then be able to opt out of these read alouds or the discussions that are happening? And are they planned early enough so that parents know when they're happening so they could opt out?
I mean, I think my instinct is saying that, so if the words is defined as instruction pertaining to me, and what we've heard from the administration and in the write-up of that particular resource was that it was not instruction pertaining to gender identity. So that, to me, that book would not be an opt-out, but I would.
Yeah, the district would be
Right, but
obligated to notify parents if they were using any resource that was addressing the topic of human sexuality as an instructional material for all students. So that would happen. We would have to do that prior and notice that appropriately. My tagline for the past year plus has been curriculum is not a secret. I want to make sure parents know what the optional resources are that teachers have. So in our January meeting of this committee, we'll have our social and emotional learning website up and ready to go, and it will list all of the titles that go with the words that are associated with ruler by grade, so they can see what the texts are. And none of them meet the categories, the criteria that are listed as opt-out.
Okay, so just a follow-up on that, because the book that most of us have read, right, is like, 5-minute book, right? But it was described as a 30 to 45-minute read aloud. I'm just curious, is there a script that's going along with that? Is the teacher just coming up with her own or his own? I'm sorry, I shouldn't assume female. Or is there something specific that they are speaking to?
There's not a script that goes with each of the books, but it is there is an approach that teachers use when they're doing interactive read alouds to ask questions for understanding and to have students talk to each other and talk as a whole group. So it was a discussion.
Thank you.
I think we touched on something here that we need to look at further, which is who gets to decide, or how is it decided whether these books or any instructional material meets that definition. I personally, the book we're discussing right now, without saying the name of it, I would not call it anything about sexuality or sexual in any way, shape, or form myself. So I would not have expected that that would be a book that would be that parents would be informed of, so that they'd have the opportunity to opt their children out of that read aloud, which I have heard described in a number of ways, to be fair. How much time was spent on the book. However, so I think that's going to be a tricky spot, and how do we navigate that?
So I think going forward, there's a sense of the committee, Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, or from your point of view, is that to move this to the full board and discuss punting it to policy to create a policy around challenging instructional materials. Is that what I'm hearing from everybody?
I think it is. I'm struggling with how much of this is policy, how much we need to give to policy to consider. And full disclosure, I believe we have the same exact board members on the policy committee that we have on the curriculum committee, coincidentally, but we wouldn't necessarily have the same cabinet members or people in attendance at the policy meeting. And obviously curriculum needs to be discussed in curriculum and policy. So I just want to make sure that we're covering what needs to be covered in this proper discussion. To take to the board where we could discuss all of it, certainly, and then to hand off to policy. Should we be?
Tara, what are your thoughts?
I would agree that I think it probably needs to be a full board discussion.
Full board, I'm sorry, is that what you said, Tara?
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so should we?
And we're talking about a policy for how we handle challenges to instructional resources.
Correct.
Not a policy for how we write curriculum. That's
Correct. At this, yeah.
There's also clarity in when you look at the sample policies, you'll notice some places have a policy for challenging instructional materials. Others have the challenging instructional materials within their instructional materials policy.
Right.
So there are paths.
Yeah, so I think that's an important distinction, because does this fall in is this an addendum, for lack of a better word, to our existing policy, or is this a completely separate policy?
Or is it regulations?
That's probably a policy question for the policy.
That I would agree is
Wherever
definitely.
it lies, wherever they feel it lies, to bring back a recommendation to the board would, I think we'll navigate that one way or the other. I think the main thing is to get a review of a policy up and running around challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly appetite among us, and I think there's appetite among the community to have a more, delineated process for this. So.
Yes.
Yes, I would agree.
Can I just add two more things before we move?
Sure.
I think whatever we take to the board or hand off to policy, one of the goals of what we create is to make it an efficient, streamlined process. I think a tremendous number of hours have gone into handling the latest concerns, and hopefully we can make that more smooth and swift, or whatever, moving forward, efficient. And then the other piece, another piece, not the, informing the public. I think if people understand better how you're going to look at a resource and assess it, when challenged, if that information is more broadly available, then people might understand better, like, okay, this is probably why they've chosen to move forward with this, or that's the part I wasn't understanding, et cetera, et cetera. So those 4 points, I think, in your presentation would be great to share regularly.
Okay, so we will move this Tuesday night, and we'll suggest to the board that we take this up in policy. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item of the kindergarten through grade 3 reading program. Dr. Tranberg and Mrs. Roller.
Good morning, everybody. So you have probably been hearing a lot in the media about the science of reading and legislation in Connecticut. So I thank you for this opportunity to be here this morning and provide an update about what has been happening since January 2022, when we last came to the curriculum committee. So just our agenda for this morning, I'm going to talk about the shifts, give a little background history, define some terms for you, and talk about our curricular resources in Darien, what has remained the same, what has changed, and what are next steps for us. So why the shift? Overall, about a third of our nation's children are not reading at grade level. And while the majority of those children are children of poverty and minority of students, there are things about the science of reading that are impacting all of our instruction. So there's some ongoing research. Comprehension begins with oral language. The importance of intentional phonemic awareness instruction, phonics instruction that's systematic, a shift in the way high frequency words are learned through orthographic mapping, which orthographic mapping is a process by which individuals have an oral language. So we know the meaning of words, we know the pronunciation of words, and we use that to think about the sounds of the words and then map that to the letters. So for example, a word like sheep, we know the meaning, we know how to pronounce it. So we can say sh, e, we can break that out into 3 sounds and sort of box that out. And that helps make a connection in the neurological pathways of the brain. So we know that that's how readers learn to read. Cueing for visual, VSM is visual semantic meaning, how the words look on the page, the sentence structure, and the meaning. Obviously, reading is about meaning, and decodable text. So that is what the research has been telling us. The legislation, we put this into 3 buckets: oversight, accountability, and support. So there's a coordinated statewide plan for reading and the establishment of a Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success. They've also established a Leadership Implementation Council. There is legislation regarding specific universal screeners and the use of reading curricula or program that are aligned with the science of reading. There's also a provision for professional learning for teachers and collaboration with higher education. So what's been happening since January? In May of last year, districts and publishers were invited to submit programs to the state for review. There was a program review comprised of 16 members. 2 people reviewed each program. And then in September 2022, the commissioner came out with a list to districts about 6 approved programs. They've now added a 7th. And districts are required to implement one of those programs by July 2023. Superintendents are to submit a survey to the state indicating one of 3 things. Either they will implement one of those programs by July, they are requesting a waiver, or a 1-year extension due to insufficient funding or resources. As of this time, we don't know what the waiver process is going to look like because we haven't received that. So ongoing, there's been an explosion in journalism and the media about the science of reading. But the debate is not new. This has been going on since the 50s. Why Johnny can't read, a lack of phonics created a national crisis. In the 60s and 70s, it was the debate between whole language and phonics. 1983 was a nation at risk, talked about standards and accountability. In 2002, it was reading first as part of No Child Left Behind that talked about scientifically based reading instruction. In 2015, that was expanded with Every Child Succeeds. States measure accountability in reading, math, and science. And now the legislation has shifted a bit from federal to state. So science of reading, many states have their own legislation around that. So the story in the media is that kids are not being taught how to read in school, that there is one way to teach kids how to read, and it is through a systematic structured phonics approach. Most teachers use a balanced literacy or a 3 cueing approach, and teachers incorporate very little phonics and instead teach kids to guess at words. The facts about best practices in reading instruction, absolutely students do need explicit systematic phonics and phonemic awareness. Research also points to a broad set of skills required to become proficient readers, and it encompasses research from education, psychology, linguistics, and neuroscience. A cueing system, and I do talk about this later when I define these terms, but a cueing system is something that teachers use to analyze the kind of errors that students are making when they listen to them read aloud in a running record. And they determined what cueing system kids are using, whether it's that meaning, visual, attending to the print, or semantics where they're syntax where they're looking at the sentence structure, so that they can teach into what kids are not using. Meaning is important, but prompting should be prioritized for decoding and then for checking for understanding. So just some terms that you'll hear over and over again. Balanced literacy, what this is it is a framework comprised of whole class and small group methods of instruction. And there is an appendix that really gets into this, and I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate sounds in spoken words. So for example, blending and segmenting are very important. So blending is when kids hear k, a, t, and they blend it together to say cat. Segmenting is when they see the word cat and they can break it apart into those distinct sounds. Phonics is the understanding that letters represent sounds and kids can decode, that means sound out words in text, and encode, spell them correctly. And orthographic mapping, again, I talked about that very important process that links oral language to decoding, phonemic awareness and decoding, so that words become automatic, that readers don't use their brains to even think about the words, they become sight words. Cueing, again, it is that strategy for analyzing records, and cueing for running records. Cueing is also how we prompt kids. It means we tell them, now we say, use slider power. So read all of the sounds and letters in the words to sound it out. Decodable texts are texts with words that contain only the phonics concepts that readers have learned so that they can apply those phonics concepts to reading texts. So this is the balanced literacy framework. This is what high quality instruction looks like. And I'm not going to get into all of these components. Some are whole class, some are small group, but I will talk about a few of them. Interactive read aloud is when the purpose of it is about comprehension, it's about vocabulary, it's about building oral language skills. It is when the teachers are deliberate and intentional about thinking aloud and to teach, implicitly teach comprehension, but also teach vocabulary, and then pause at certain parts where kids can engage in discourse to build their own oral language. Emergent read aloud is a structure just for kindergarten, which mimics the kind of reading that families do at home, where kids love to hear the same book over and over again, like think about Goodnight Moon. And it builds kids' sense of story, it builds their own oral language. It is really based on the work of Elizabeth Salisbury and oral language, where kids then start to tell the story, talk about the story, and actually read the story independently. Shared reading is a method of teaching accurate and fluent reading. Two best ways to do that are repeated reading and echo reading, where a fluent reader reads and then kids mimic that. And then there's choral reading where everybody reads together. So that's a method where teachers might use a poem or a short text and read it every single day of the week for 10 minutes practicing, so kids get better and better. All of those things impact what kids do independently during reading workshop. So reading workshop is a whole class structure. The teacher teaches a brief and explicit mini lesson. It's about 8 to 10 minutes, ideally. The teacher has a specific teaching point, and then there's some kind of a demonstration. Kids are on the rug and they're trying something out. The teacher is listening to them, giving some coaching, some feedback, and then kids go back and practice independently. So they're practicing in their either teacher curated books, which is a mixture of decodable and level text, or in the upper grades, they're reading their level text in a specific genre. If it's nonfiction, they're reading informational text, fantasy, mystery, etc. During that time, the teacher is providing individualized instruction through conferring, meeting with kids one-on-one and seeing how they're doing. And that's a time when they might be taking some of those running records or talking about comprehension, or they're pulling a small group. And there's two types of small groups. There's guided reading, which means you've heard about reading levels. Kids have a reading on a roughly right reading level. Guided reading is when the teachers are demystifying the next level of text. So for example, for beginning readers who are reading chapter books, particularly in second grade, moving from one level to the other might have untagged dialogue. So it doesn't say who the speaker is. That's hard for kids. So the teachers are navigating that. And then those become instructional texts that kids are reading and practicing with teacher guidance. Strategy group is a group of readers who may be at all different levels, but have the same need. It could be that they're not monitoring for meaning. It could be that they need to work on fluency or stamina. So the teacher's working with them. So just these things aren't happening every single day, but teachers are flexible about knowing the kids in front of them and the instruction that is required. Just to give you some background about our curricular resources in Darien, prior to 2004, the district was using a Basel reader. I believe it was Open Court. And then in 2004, we brought in Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. At that time, the units were developed locally and teachers were involved in creating curriculum with support and training from Teachers College. For word study, because we always knew that phonics was important, we used the Fontes and Pinnell word study program. Wasn't as explicit as we would have liked. So in 2008, we tried a new program, Donald Bear's Making Words, which is when kids are sorting for phonics concepts. Also in 2008, Teachers College came out with a packaged curriculum. It was not grade level specific. There was a K2 kit and a 3-5 kit. We implemented that. And I won't go through this, but you can see all the iterations of the Teachers College reading material. In 2015, though, we did implement Foundations because we wanted that systematic explicit phonics. Foundations is one of the most widely researched and used approaches. It's multi-sensory, and we started it in kindergarten. It has been for the past 6 years in all grades K3. It's about 30 minutes a day. Everybody is doing that. Last year, we added Heggerty for phonemic awareness. We added it in kindergarten. And actually, some first grade teachers were telling me last week that they are already seeing improvements in kids' writing, which is exciting. This year, we implemented it in first grade. So that's exciting also. And then just last week, we got our hard copies of the new Teachers College units of study for kindergarten through second grade, and they have been completely revised to align with the science of reading. So what does our evidence-based reading instruction look like in Darien? These are some things that we have always done. Explicit instruction in phonemic awareness, in systematic phonics, in comprehension, fluency, critical thinking, and text analysis, all those skills that in addition to foundational skills, we know that readers need to meet the demands of the Common Core standards. We've also been providing explicit instruction in oral language development. Read aloud has always been a cornerstone of our program. Data-driven small group instruction and adherence to scientifically based research intervention process, SRBI, which means high quality differentiated instruction for all students, universal screening. So universal screening means just the same screeners 3 times a year for all kids to make sure that we are not missing anybody. And informal and formal assessments. We have specific criteria for intervention. We have a 3-tiered support. So students who are not meeting benchmarks, tier 1 is additional small group instruction in the classroom. Kids who are still not making progress, we have reading interventionists who provide tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. And the higher it goes, obviously, the more intensive in terms of time and reduced size of the group, so it's more specific. We have ongoing progress monitoring every 2 weeks, and we have school-based data teams with teachers, specialists, special educators, administrators who review progress and adjust plans as needed, and close communication with families. How is our reading instruction evolving? With our instructional shifts, we're strengthening our phonemic awareness instruction by adding Heggerty to grade 1. We are also strengthening comprehension in oral language by being much more strategic about when to stop and think aloud and when to provide those opportunities for students to talk, what vocabulary we're embedding. High frequency words, we were teaching kids to just memorize the words. Now we're using that orthographic mapping process. We are prioritizing print strategies and prompting for decoding and blending. We're using decodable text to practice phonics. We're incorporating new assessments for progress monitoring, and we're aligning our professional learning to the science of reading for all staff. These are some of the shifts in our materials. There's more attention to explicit phonics instruction and transfer. There are assessments that are embedded across the year in our units of study. There are specific small group lessons to address challenges, and the prompts have changed. There are prompts for word solving, fluency, and comprehension, and they're fabulous. And I've included some of them in the appendices because we can use them with our paraprofessionals, teachers, our special educators. So that consistency in language is very supportive for kids. There's less reliance on picture support, no reference to guessing at words, additional lessons in foundational skills to be used as needed, the addition of decodable text, and the instructional texts that teachers are using are at or above grade level, and they increase in complexity and lexile level across the year. So the next steps for us. In December, next week, Dr. Adley is going to submit a survey to the state. In February, we will complete the waiver process when it is available. Again, we have not seen that yet, so we don't know what it's going to look like, but we do know that it's going to be very involved and time consuming, which is fine because we believe in what we're doing. Ongoing, we're providing that high quality professional learning to all staff in the science of reading, including our paraprofessionals, including our special education staff. And we are continuing to look at ways to address the gap for students not meeting benchmark. So really important is what we believe. We believe that all students need explicit instruction in all of the pillars of literacy. We don't believe that kids learn to read by magic. We believe that they need time to apply their skills in books that they will love with coaching and continuous feedback. Reading is complex and it requires a mix of instructional methods and materials. We know that motivation, which is really important in learning, stems from being part of a literacy-rich environment with a classroom filled with beautiful books that all students can and want to read, and peers who talk about books, share book recommendations. We know that learning is social, and just as we like to be in book clubs, so do kids. We believe that students need ownership and choice in their learning. We want all children to become skilled, confident, lifelong readers who use their literacies to improve themselves and the world. And of course, we do want to foster a love of reading, spark joy. And this last one, we believe that at the heart of all good instruction is an expert teacher who uses a knowledge of their students, research-based strategies, and formative assessments to personalize instruction. We believe that programs don't teach children, that teachers teach children. Teachers with the wisdom, the flexibility, and the resources to meet the individual needs of the kids in front of them. So before we move to discussion, I just want to show you in your linked to this presentation, there are some appendices. There's an overview of the balanced literacy framework, which is actually what we use for our new teacher professional learning. There is a sample of the kindergarten scope and sequence with suggested assessments. There's a sample of the teaching points in one of our units, so you can actually see in the superpowers unit that there is no more reference to guessing at words. It's all around phonics. There is a sample of those coaching guides. There's a word solving coaching guide and a comprehension coaching guide. And finally, there's a sample of some of those additional foundational lessons. I pulled some phonemic awareness lessons. So, questions and discussion.
Thank you. That was quite thorough, and I think that there's a lot of information and terms and in here that is very helpful for us to understand. I mean, I guess the elephant in the room is that we are using our literacy program is not one of the now 7 approved state curricula. So applying for the waiver is your plan. Going forward, is that plan to get the 1-year extension? What do you think? Do you feel like the TC and Haggerty and foundations all mixed together is satisfactory for our children? More than satisfactory, is optimal.
Absolutely.
You do.
I do.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of, to your point about what's being out in the media, there's not a lot of love for TC or for Lucy Calkins at the moment. So can you speak to why you still think the TC is should be part of our program?
Fundamentally, because one size does not fit all, because I think we would be taking a big step backwards. And we've looked at all of those programs. They are, they're basals. So it's all kids reading the same text. There's a lot of kids doing workbooks. There's a lot of workbooks online. We have a very robust database. We use RTI Studio. So we already have a way of looking at information with our kids. We believe that it should be the teacher sitting down and listening to kids and conferring and meeting in small group, rather than having kids answer questions on a computer and having that then move them into something else that they need. Also, the instructional materials have been completely, not completely, but that the foundational skills piece has been completely revamped. But all of the things that we value in Teachers College, that choice, that building agency, that teaching to comprehension, which is really important, the fluency, all of that research is something that you're not hearing about in the media. You're only hearing about that one piece of it. So, and when these programs were evaluated, the new revised units were not even available. So, so that's one piece of it. We were also asked they were looking at programs. So we don't believe that there is one core program. We believe that we need to pick and choose. We also have systems in place here. We have leadership. We have teachers who have been receiving professional development for years. So we don't think that the needs of every child in the state are the same and should be can be met with the same program.
I mean, I absolutely hear that point that there, you know, even if you have a classroom of 22 children, not every one program is not going to reach every child. Like there are children that read by magic, you know, there are kids
There
that
are.
enter kindergarten reading and you don't have to teach them how to read.
Mhm.
And they know how to decode seemingly by magic, but there are others that need a lot more support. And I guess this is a question for Shirley. Do you feel like what we are currently doing is supporting those kids that need the added support, or do we need to do even more? I mean, I know anecdotally, there are a lot of children at Windward because they're struggling readers and writers. Is that something that with the introduction of Haggerty and with the introduction of, you know, a more phonics, phonemic awareness based program, would we possibly expect to have some of those children remain in districts?
I'll answer the first part and then hypothetically, I don't know. Each child is looked at individually, what makes those decisions for families, but I will speak to the first part. I think what Julie said in our shared belief is that TC standing alone is not what we're providing right now. We're providing TC alongside a very rigorous phonological, morphological, systematic reading program. And that's since 2015 when we got here, when Foundations was implemented. Alongside Foundations, which really looks at phonology and decoding and encoding, we added Haggerty. All our students, remember, children who receive specially designed instructions are general education children who are in the classroom receiving instruction in those areas. And as to Julie's point, the notion of phonology, morphology, syntax, and decoding and encoding standing alone is not a robust reading program. The notion of really having it, not only the love for learning, because you probably know, you've seen with your own children, when kids are learning to read, they almost feign reading. They sit down with a book and make believe they're reading. It's the joy of trying to walk through a book, have a book walk, understand it, look at the context. So we're not asking children to guess at words. We're asking children to still have the understanding of literacy and enjoying the act of reading, and at the same time have the decodable and encodable skills to really attack new words. So the short answer is yes, I believe TC alongside a lot of the new elements in TC with an emphasis on Haggerty, Foundations, and explicit reading instruction meets the needs of our students. The second part of the question is there are children who having that one dose is not enough. There are children who really just getting it in within the structure of the general education classroom still continue to need direct and explicit instruction to either have a different pace to it, have more reinforcement, have a different multisensory experience to it, because you might be emphasizing a different modality when you're teaching it to different children. So it's not going to, it will support instruction, but we will still know that we'll need our students to have some direct explicit instruction if they need specially designed instruction. So I think looking at a robust program, taking all the elements that Julie's presentation speaks to would address the needs of our students. That said, we continue to train all our teachers in Wilson. Foundations is related and has that same emphasis as the program. We'll still have specially designed in programs, instruction for our students who need an additional exposure to reading instruction.
I think that piece is incredibly important, right? I mean, it's not necessarily what the curriculum is in front of our kids. It's who's teaching who the human being is in the room, instituting that, and all the shifting. I mean, the pendulum shifts back and forth. And if you've been teaching for 30 years, you've seen that and you've had to go back and forth. And, you know, making sure that our teachers really are educated in what they are doing is highly imperative to a successful program. So I'm glad to hear that that is a focus of yours.
I have two questions. One, I think is pretty quick, but how does our district compare to the national scores as far as reading at grade level? Are we scoring?
So we are well above.
Okay.
Third grade, we're at 80%, and we're in the 80s in
Okay.
all grades. So
I suspected that was
yes,
the case. I
second
thought
in
it deserved
Connecticut.
air.
Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you. And then my other is just something I'm wondering about. Do we have any concerns that when we provide sort of a patchwork of approaches to teaching learning, could that give a student a crutch that might help make it harder for us to identify a student that needs additional supports? Can they find, or does it give them a support. Yeah, and it's probably a combination of both, but could you speak to that just a little bit, if that makes sense?
Yes, I would actually say that it's additional supports because with foundations, we have end of unit assessments that we look at. But then in reading workshop, we're also looking at those learning records and we're listening to kids read. And so we're checking in on the transfer because it really is all about transfer. Same thing. We have phonemic awareness assessments that we're using, but also what are we hearing kids do and what are we seeing them apply to their writing?
Okay, and might that actually make it easier to identify where a student is struggling because they're,
Yes,
excuse me, doing better here and struggling more
Right.
there?
right, exactly.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay, thank you.
So something you'll see to connect to this, we need to revisit our progress reports at some point in the near future as well. And we want to make sure that the level of, we want our progress reports to be as diagnostic as our approaches to teaching reading. So there's direct connections to where those challenges might be communicated regularly.
Thanks.
If I may just add to that also. If I may just add to that, I think the notion of progress monitoring is something that's essential to any reading program and delivery of instruction. Actually, the New Connecticut SEDS actually has a progress monitoring emphasis to show as well. So I think within both opportunities, whether it's in the classroom or with specially designed instruction, progress monitoring really lets you have short glimpses of really measuring student progress in both phonology and in comprehension, vocabulary, and literacy.
And by the way, I think that that's for all students because even our students who are reading above grade level need to be making progress and growth.
But Dr. Adley, can you speak a little bit to what you're seeing from other superintendents, other districts, how they're handling this process? And
Yeah, certainly we're not alone. Weston, Wilton, Ridgefield, New Canaan, just to name some of the districts are using the curriculum and program and instructional practices that we are. So we're certainly not alone in that. There's a lot of frustration. This went through in the implementer bill. Most of it went through in the implementer bill. We have the distinction that Julie's talking about in terms of we fundamentally disagree between curriculum and programs. They have provided 5 programs. I have no problem with the greater good, right? Before the pandemic, there was 47% or something of our kids across Connecticut in grade 3 weren't meeting benchmark. After the pandemic, it's just over 50, right? So I understand the need, but it continues to be the discrepancy between one program, one size fits all. We have the commissioner, when the release of the grades came out, commending priority school districts for their progress in reading and for the development and scores. Well, the very one that was recognized uses TC. So I think we actually submitted our program. We weren't required to. We submitted it to be actually reviewed as part of one of the 5 programs that they're talking about. So there's a lot of flurry of communication between the commissioner. We have been involved in that. We've supported and had discussions with professional organizations. We've been at the table. Our vice chair, in place of our chair who was traveling, was at the legislative breakfast where this was discussed. So we're advocating for it. At the moment, I have not completed the survey because the survey is really just like, not necessarily, it's just a selection of 3 options. One is you're definitely going to do it. 2 is, well, you're going to defer it and do it, right? Because
do it, you mean switch to one of
the programs, and the only reason we're giving you the opportunity to defer that for the year is because of finances, which, you know, if anybody's interested, I mean, the actual finances to change to one of these programs is approximately $600,000, depending on how you implement it, but between 550 and 7 somewhere, depending on choices you make. That's not really, it is an issue, but it's not really the issue. The last one is just a waiver. Well, you need to define what the waiver says, because if the waiver commits you to something else, or there's language in that waiver, even if you were doing the programming, which was just recently released, right, in the fall here, right? I mean, to do the professional learning for staff that one of those would require, to think you're going to do that well and implement in July, whenever all the professional development is already up and running, when all the expenditures are already taking place, when teachers would have no ownership in the process, to shape or just talk about all the curriculum and instructional practice we talked about this morning. I mean, it's just unrealistic, even if you were doing it. And you jumped on board, it just wouldn't even be realistic to put in place. Have reason to believe that there's going to be an extension of some of the flexibilities. It seems that there's a willingness to be a wee bit more flexible now and lighten up a little bit more. But I honestly can't be definitive about that, and I'm reluctant to commit the district to doing things that I don't know what's in the language of the waiver.
Mr. Cameron, do you want to add anything from the breakfast? Unfortunately, I could not attend, but you were there.
Thank you, Sarah. I do. One of the other things that came up is the potential disruption to students who have already been disrupted by the pandemic. This is a large scale change in reading. And so for many of our districts who are already have successful reading programs in place, to completely and quickly implement a new program could potentially adversely affect many of our young learners in ways that would be difficult to overcome. Again, to Alan's point, we're sympathetic absolutely to the need to get as many students as possible up to grade level reading. But this, there was a lot of concern at the breakfast from every district in attendance about this particular bill and the level of specificity of the programs, the fact that the waiver doesn't exist yet, and the fast timeline, and then the cost. All of those four things came up. Thank you.
And I think, what everybody's been saying is that we certainly want to do what's best for our children. And we're constantly as a district looking at what we do and what is in front of our children. And I've heard some in the community have reached out to me and said, well, you're not doing what the state says, so you're not doing what's best for our kids. Like they say that this is what's best for our kids. And I have to push back on that a little bit. I mean, I think we do what we think is best and what our experts are saying is best for our children. So, I think it's a tricky situation, but I'm very curious to see what the waiver says and what's going to happen.
Sarah, can I add one more thing? Sorry. At the breakfast, there was a person in attendance who asked, does any one of these programs outperform what many of our districts currently have? And there was no yes answer to that question. So I think when we talk about doing what's best for our kids, your point, Julie, about what our current scores are and your question are very valid. There are no indications that these programs actually would change outcomes for all districts. For some, for sure they would, but not for all, which is Alan's one size fits all point.
Right. No, thanks. Thank you. I think we'll move on to our next topic, which is Julie, thank you for that presentation. Sorry, I didn't say thank you. New high school course proposals for the 2023-24 school year. We discussed these at our board meeting last week or 2 weeks, whenever that was, a few weeks ago. Dr. Tramberg.
So just as a reminder from our last meeting, we're a bit out of sequence this year, just because we did not have a meeting last month. And we do want to stay within the timeline of the budget cycle. So we're just a little bit off right now. So the full board heard these new proposals at our last meeting. There are 3 new courses. There's a Spanish course, American Sign Language, and guitar ensemble. I have a few responses in relation to some of the discussion. I can talk about those now unless we want them for the full board.
I think we can talk about them now.
Okay. So there was a question regarding music ensembles and numbers. And I think it's really trying to get at the predictability of who's coming to the classes and will the seats fill. So with music, there are currently 240 students in the high school ensembles, and that's band, chorus, and orchestra courses. There are 30 students in the elective programs, which are music theory, music tech, and adaptive music. And they're anticipating that they would have a class of about 15 students, which would increase the elective enrollment by 50%, but not necessarily, because they're not asking for any FTE to support this. So you might end up having students that take guitar and you're going to run one section of music technology instead of 2, just as an example. The other piece is we have a program at the middle school where students are experiencing guitar in grade 6, 7, and 8 if they're in this course, and then they have nowhere to go with it. So this is an opportunity for students that may have enjoyed guitar to actually have a place to go. And the design of the guitar ensemble class does allow them to take it similar to choir, band, and orchestra. You can take it year after year. The other question, I think, was regarding the sequence of Spanish in general and who's taking those courses. If you look at Christina made a beautiful chart of the pinks and the yellows and what does it all mean? What they're trying to do is make sure they have opportunities for students to take 4 years of language at the high school if they would like to, without having to take an advanced placement course. So if you look at the pathways, we have students who, because our world language program has become so robust, are entering the high school in Spanish 3. And when you were looking at transcripts, so when they're applying for college, if they start at 3, they might be finishing AP as juniors, and then where do we go now? So there is an AP Lit course, which is a very challenging AP course. But what about students who might not want to take AP Lit? What about students that didn't want to take the AP Lang before then? So now they have these options to go all the way through. And so some courses are labeled 5, some are labeled 6. That is really with the intention of showing the sequence. So when students are applying for college, they're going to see that they took 4 years sequential of a language in high school.
I don't know that I have any other questions except a comment that to me, especially the ASL, seems that we are opening doors for students that may not necessarily have a place for a language in high school. And I think not only that it's not oral, but it's just it's a different modality that is helpful for many, hopefully would be helpful for many students. So and it sounds like that guitar ensemble as well will open doors for some that may not necessarily have a place in the music department.
I would just add, if I may, that it's just exciting to see that we continue to find ways to offer a comprehensive and rigorous curriculum at whatever level the student is ready to engage, whether that's the AP level, following the course, the sequence of the course, all the way through, et cetera. It's great. So thank you.
So this will be on for action on Tuesday. And if there are more questions then from other members, we can answer them then. But, okay, we move on to public comments. Michelle.
Good morning. Anyone in person would like to participate? Please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment.
Amy Zerby, 9 Morehouse Drive. I wanted to thank all the administrators and the teachers. I don't know how you guys can come into work every day, given what's going on in this district, and I really appreciate it. Things we lost to the water and Julian is a Mermaid were targeted because they have LGBTQ elements, and I wish that you guys would discuss that. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Armel Jacobs, 12 Fitch. First of all, thank you for your presentations and for all the time and energy you guys put into all of this. I know that it is a lot, and for all of you, I'm very grateful. I just have a high-level comment about sort of how you guys are going through the process as you build out and create some of the policies that we're talking about. I think that it is very important and needed to have an instructional challenge process. So as you guys go through that, I think it's wonderful that you're doing it. I also heard a concern, I think, from Mr. Brown, or a desire to ask for more oversight or review or control generally over the curriculum as a whole. And listen, that's not necessarily a terrible thing either. What I want to convey is that as you go through these processes and you create and build out the policies that you're talking about, that you don't sort of lose sight of the entire mission overall. You know, what you guys, obviously, most of your charge is to create a system that has happy, healthy learners that approximate that vision of the graduate that you guys have laid out. So, you know, in a sense, I do feel sometimes that there's a Greek tragedy element to this whole thing where, you know, in the desire to control and change your fate or to really exact your will over it, you might end up creating the outcome that you want to avoid. So just to get specific, I mean, you don't want to create a policy, right, where at the end of the day, your teachers, your backbone are feeling highly exposed. Or you don't want to create a situation where the board itself has exerted so much control that at any point, your instructors are thinking someone with a pitchfork comes to BOE and creates havoc. And now my life is turned upside down because now anyone can come and participate in a public trial over my 20-minute lesson. So my basic comment is just try to keep the overall goal in mind. I'm not saying transparency is bad. I'm not saying, opacity is good. What I'm saying is that I think you should don't end up sealing your own fate. We don't want to be that snake eating its own tail and realize that we've consumed ourselves when it's too late. So please don't destroy your most precious resource. Support your teachers and don't exact so much control that maybe you end up hurting that overall mission. Just a high level comment. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else? Is there anybody online? Oh, so sorry.
Good morning, everybody. I'm probably a new face to most of you. This is only my third year here in Darien. My name is Michael Cantwell. I have two daughters. One daughter is at Middlesex in 7th grade, and another one is in 4th grade at Tokenique. This is my first time at one of these, so I appreciate the time and the opportunity to make comments. I was surprised, like many parents, last week when we were on national news, our little town. I moved out of the city a few years ago and was very much enjoying not being in the national news in the last couple of years. So, of course, like many parents, I wanted to find out what made this story from our little town nationally newsworthy. So I looked into it, and I just want to try to understand the discrepancies that I now see. So Alan wrote a note last week saying that this book that was used is not a lesson on gender identity. So I said, okay, so this is about nothing. But then I looked at online and looked up the author and the book itself and read the book. And the author, Jessica Love, the first thing I find is she's on a YouTube show called Queer Kid Stuff. And a talking teddy bear asks her, what are your pronouns and how do you identify? And she says, mostly female, I guess. You can call me she, her, till things change. In the same interview, she articulates her inspiration for this story, which is about a friend of hers whom she says he's a boy, but he was born in a girl's body. Another interview, she's asked about how she developed the book, and she said, I was thinking about gender. So there's quite a few things when we say, as a body, this is not about this. And then to the person who actually created the thing, it's exactly about this. It creates confusion, and I think it creates a sense of I don't want to say mistrust, but it causes people to question what's going on. If the board were, the administration were very clear, this is a book about gender identity, and the author was very clear it's about gender identity, and it's taught as gender identity, then great, we can have a discussion about where is that appropriate to be. But it shouldn't be, this is not a book about this, but it's going to be used in a different way to talk about something else, and we're not sure what goes on. It's just the appearance of it.
Mr. Cantwell, you're almost at time.
Okay, thank you. That's my only point is, I think this is unnecessarily controversial and could be clarified with just some simple honesty. And if it's not about, this controversial topic, then, maybe there's a better choice that is about what we're actually trying to teach and is very clear about that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else? Anyone online?
Anyone online would like to participate, please raise your hand using the icon. There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn? I'll move. I have a second. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.